This episode of the Rotary Voices podcast is brought to you by Archaeological Paths. Explore Egypt with renowned archaeologists. Visit www.archaeologicalpaths.com for more information.
I have cooked for presidents and governors, and then cooking for people who could make change or create change. I always felt that food somehow or another would help them make the right decisions. Diplomacy enables us to come together. A little food goes a long way. And thanks to wonderful people like Rotary who are helping to feed people, not only their stomachs, but their minds, and create shelter and as well as education, they have been able to do and carry that wonderful universal philosophy is that we are all God's creatures.
Welcome to Rotary Voices podcast. I'm Monica Eng. In this episode, we feature the iconic American restaurateur, philanthropist, and cookbook author, Art Smith. Smith grew up in Florida and was, by his own account, not the greatest student. But when it came to food and hospitality, he excelled. His talent soon found him in the Florida governor's mansion, cooking for Governors Bob Graham and Jeb Bush. By 1997, he'd become Oprah Winfrey's personal chef and would go on to cook for Barack and Michelle Obama. Today, he's authored several cookbooks, including Healthy Comfort, Kitchen Life, Back to the Family, and Back to the Table. They feature his signature Southern dishes, including his famous fried chicken and hummingbird cake, but also healthy alternatives and plant-centric foods still delicious enough to bring people together. Over the decades, the chef has launched multiple restaurants, including Homecoming Kitchen in Disney Springs, Blue Door and Reunion in Chicago. And if that's not enough, the chef has just launched a new restaurant in Chicago's Time Out Market called Sporty Bird. Smith helped start the U.S. Culinary Corps, a group of America's most influential chefs tasked with working with the State Department to promote cultural exchange. As part of that, he cooks part-time for the U.S. Ambassador to Portugal. In 2003, Smith started the nonprofit Common Threads. It teaches youth how to cook healthy, affordable meals to help promote diversity and reduce childhood obesity. For this, he won the James Beard Humanitarian of the Year Award in 2007. Smith recently bought a share in the Chicago Hounds, the Windy City's Major League Rugby team. I recently caught up with him at a game to talk about his family connections to Rotary, his culinary inspirations, his charity work, and more. Chef Art Smith, I hear you know a lot about Rotary and their humanitarian work around the globe. What's your connection to Rotary?
Yes. Well, I grew up in Jasper, Florida, which had a very, very active Rotary Club. And my grandfather, Palmer Smith, was a Rotarian and also Lions. I think the Lions Club he was in both of them, but Rotarian was one of his big things. And my Uncle John is a Rotary member in Stark, Florida. And I always loved them because of their outreach, and the fact is that they are all about what I'm about, is finding that common thread of humanity and focusing on that. And that's what they do, and they do good, and they create good, wonderful things that are sustainable. There are a lot of people doing good, but one of the things I think is important is when you go and do good, the fact is you leave something that people can use and it can help their lives. And the Rotarians, they build schools, they build homes, they do all kinds of really great stuff. And one of the things I love about them, they're not political whatsoever. They come just for the love of humanity. And I think that's important. I think that if we keep politics out of just the love of humanity, I think we can do so much good.
So tell me about your upbringing. I understand you were raised by an African-American woman?
Yes, I grew up with an African-American woman, Leela Curry. I was 3 months old, and she came into our lives. I was extremely close to her because of my age. And Leela taught me so many things and told me stories. I grew up in the South, and quite honestly, in the South, not a lot of people in that time could read or write. And the way that they preserved history was through storytelling. Leela would tell me wonderful stories. And my favorite things that I remember about her, not just her fried chicken, which was delicious, she would sing gospel. And she really introduced me to music of the African American church. And we had wood floors, and so you could hear her shuffling her feet, and you could hear her singing throughout the house. And as a little kid, I loved that. And during that era, it was the 1960s, and there was always some terrible unrest. And I would just look at her, and I said, why? And she would say, honey, people just got to learn to love each other. And I've never forgotten that. I've never gotten her. I never got fried chicken. I never got her wonderful, wonderful philosophy about loving people.
That seems to be a theme that goes through your work, whether it's the charitable work or the food or adoption of children. Love seems to be a continuing theme.
Well, I do think that a little food can do a lot of wonderful things. I always say, feed them, they come, you keep feeding them, they stay, you keep feeding them a lot, and you change things. And you put a little love behind it, you've got a beautiful love affair right up there, and you get some really great things that come together. Because we all need these opportunities, anything that brings us together as a group. When I wrote the book Back to the Table, people said, it wasn't such a pleasant thing for me as a child. I said, well, at least you knew what side of the fence you were on. Today's, children grow up not at a table, but they grow up in their computers and they don't eat together and everything. So there's this tremendous lack of communication. Communication, like again, is never necessarily what you want to hear, but at least you kind of knew what the other one thought about. And one of the dangers, I believe, is not really knowing how the other feels, what's really taxing for them. And that's what creates challenges in relationships as well as challenges, everything. It's that not being able to properly communicate our feelings. And I love food. I have cooked for presidents and governors, and then cooking for people who could make change or create change. I always felt that food somehow or another would help them make the right decisions.
Now, you did not go to culinary school. How did you become such an amazing chef?
I went to FSU,
Florida State University.
And I discovered something called an internship. It was in free pass out of school. So my first one was the Greenbrier 5-star hotel.
In West Virginia.
Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. Anyway, I had never stepped my foot in a 5-star resort. So to learn what that's about, that was amazing. I also learned what it was like to work in a big kitchen. These chefs are pretty tough. And they would yell at me and scream at me and go peel 85 pounds of asparagus or whatever. I mean, they could be cruel. They'd look at me and say, why does a university student want to be cooking in a kitchen? You don't belong here. So they would bother me, and then I would hide from them in the pastry shop. And they always knew where I was, but they basically didn't do anything. And the pastry chef and the chocolatier said, listen, if you're going to hide down here, you're going to learn to make pastry, and you're going to learn how to make chocolate. And I gained my love for pastry and chocolate. And I always looked at chocolate as something that stopped the bully.
Because those bullies upstairs.
Exactly. And that's why I feel like I always say that you always have to have dessert because it reminds you that life can be sweet. So anyway, I went back to school, kept looking out, and along came the Disney company with the Magic Kingdom College program. And I tried out 3 or 4 times. Finally, I got into the program. And there again, they hit me again. Why does a university student want to bake cake? I want to bake cake. Don't you want to work in Magic Kingdom? No, I want to bake cake. They were nice to me, and I'd bake cakes and stuff while the kids were having fun and doing stuff. I wanted to bake cake. And so it was amazing, and I loved my time. But my biggest touche at the moment in that whole situation, there were all these culinary students.
There were culinary students at the Magic Kingdom program?
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, the chef at the Empress Lily, which was the restaurant there, Lily actually christened it, had a contest, a baking one. So guess who won it?
You?
Yes, because I had studied really hard, and this wonderful book by a wonderful pastry chef from France, and I had just really combed the book and learned a lot. And what I did was I made this inverted tart. It was French, but it was kind of Austrian, but then it had the fruit and I did the glaze. I put a lot of work into it, but I won. And I was like, you see, you don't have to go to culinary school because that doesn't teach you how to have a heart and to have passion about it. That comes from you. The teaching only teaches you technique.
Amazing.
And so I go back, left FSU, still flunking out. The dean says to me, Art, you're not a great student, but I'm going to send you over to the governor's house to help him out. So they sent me over there, and it was the year that Martha Stewart had written Entertaining. I could take her stuff. I could look at her pictures and duplicate it. And they had beautiful stuff. They had all this Florida seafood, but they just didn't know how to make it pretty. And so anyway, I do my thing, and they loved me. And one day they came to me and said, you know, Art, we have a guest coming, and would you like to cook for him? And I said, sure. I said, who's the guest? You have to learn who your audience is. And this was 1981. Mikhail Baryshnikov
You mean Mikhail Baryshnikov, the famous Latvian and American dancer?
He came to dinner. I cooked out of Julia Child's cookbook, the French cooking book, the classic one, The Art of French Cooking. They loved it and hired me as the chef. And this was for Governor Bob Graham, who sadly we lost this year. And I was their chef for about 5 years. Well, one of his people who helped him raise money stole me. And I went on a yacht. And I traveled around the world on the yacht, the 7 seas. I loved every place I'd go. And I was learning how to cook in a galley, and it's moving and everything. It was an exciting adventure. But I came back home to Florida, still loving my love of travel. And I heard about a train called the American European Express. I don't know if you remember. It was in Chicago. And it was based off the Orient Express, the famous train that Agatha Christie wrote about, and Murder on the Orient Express. And they hired me as the chef. And so I became the chef on the train. I met a lot of amazing people. But what I learned about this is that regardless of where you are, what you're doing, food is always appropriate. And either you're on an airplane or you're on a train or a boat, you can always get good food to people. And they surely do appreciate it. And so I got stuck in Chicago, and I started teaching cooking lessons. And through those cooking lessons, I met this man named Andre Walker. And he said, I like you a lot, and I want to introduce you to someone. Well, the governor, now Senator Graham, was having a party for Bill Clinton's inauguration, second. And they called for me to do a party, and I did. And then I went and checked my phone. I only had this little answer machine at home. And it said, would you come to Harpo and make lunch? I'm like, oh, God, it's Oprah. So I had a big group of people helping me.
This was in Chicago.
But no, the party was in Washington, D.C. And basically, I think that the senator's chief of staff had stopped the plane and got me on it. And so I went and I cooked all night. I don't remember what I made. I made like this paella salad. The Junior League has taught the South how to cook. I mean, more contemporary foods, but the great Southern food, thanks to our African-American culture, that what we know is Southern. And I made little key lime tarts and little tiny biscuits, little things and light things. I made a little soup. And I brought it in. I saw her on the monitor, and I had her setting it up. And I was waiting, and they said, you can go. That went on for 4 months.
What do you mean that went on for 4 months?
Going to Harpo Studios and making lunch and leaving it. And then finally, I get a call, and they said, Miss Winfrey would like to speak to you. And I'm like, oh, God, did I poison her or something? Okay, what did I do? In those days, I didn't have a car. I had to borrow the neighbor's car. I go into her makeup room. She's in her chair. And she says, Chef Art. I'm like, oh, thank you, Miss Winfrey. And she goes, Miss Winfrey, I like that. And she goes like, I need a chef. Do you need anybody? I said, yeah, me. And she goes, you're too busy. I said, I'm never too busy for the Queen. And she goes like, oh, I like that. So she hired me. And that started a 10-year adventure. She introduced me to the world on television as her chef. I cooked for Nelson Mandela, Dr. Maya Angelou. The list goes on. But most importantly, she taught me, she said, Art, honor your ancestors. Honor where you come from. Don't be ashamed to be you. Take what you've been taught and take it to the world, because you know how to feed people and you know how to feed them well. And one of the other great lessons she taught me was, Art, it's not about being different. It's about being better. Don't try to be a new idea. Just be better. Do a better job. So here you have it. Here I am.
And then you also cooked for the future president of the United States?
You know how that happened? Great story. True story. She called me in. She said, Art, I'm going to have you make dinner. And I came in and made dinner. And I'm cooking, and the doorbell rings. I open the door. It's Michelle Obama. I'm like, oh, Miss Obama. Go back to cooking. Doorbell rings again. Oh, Senator Obama. Come in. It's nice to meet you. Have a seat. She'll be right up with you. That's how intimate the situation was. So
this was in Chicago.
180 East Pearson. So anyway, they're all sitting at a little table, just her and them. I went to go serve the dish, and it was a pistachio-crusted sole. She loved it. And she says, we going to make you president, and you, Michelle, don't have time to cook because you're going to have to help us make him president. So, Art, you're going to go make food for them.
That was the first you heard of it?
Yes. And it was not uncommon for me to be cooking for Oprah and Senator Obama, now president, in my house in Hyde Park.
Wow. Were you ever starstruck?
The only person that really gave me that feeling of being starstruck was Nelson Mandela. He was an amazing man. I grew up in the 80s, with Free Nelson Mandela, and he's downright biblical.
RoyalEgypt.com presents Explore Egypt on a tour like no other and gain exclusive VIP access to Egypt's greatest wonders. Take a VIP tour of the Grand Egyptian Museum, the largest archaeological museum in the world, with one of its directors. Enjoy a private visit to the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and access hidden chambers that are closed to the public. Stand between the paws of the Great Sphinx instead of seeing it from a distant viewing platform. Explore the most awe-inspiring wonders of the ancient world, temples in Lagza, the Valley of the Kings, and King Tut's tomb outside the regular hours for a more intimate and crowd-free experience. Don't miss your chance to join this once-in-a-lifetime journey. Book your tour now at RoyalEgypt.com.
You talk about something in your TED Talk called polite protest. Can you say a little bit about what that is?
You got to feed them.
Because when you feed them,
it makes them happy and it catches them off guard. And by feeding people, you really are able to engage with them. And I've taken some very tough situations and made them better by feeding them.
you started Common Threads. Can you tell me what that is and why you started it?
I remember the morning I woke up and my friend was calling me. She said, Art, where's the shop? And I said, why? She said, plane has just hit the tower. And then I turn on the TV and I see that, and then I see the second plane, and I said, oh my God, I got to go check on Oprah. I got to take care of her. So I ran to the studio and I said, Miss Winfrey, I know you must be in an incredibly awful place, and I just want to know, I'm here for you. What do I need to do for you? She said, why don't you make everybody some soup, Art? It was one of the toughest times in terms of cooking. So during that whole time, as we were all trying to decide what was going on, a lot of really well-known people gathered and were brave and went to New York to help people. And Oprah said to me, would you go to New York and cook for people there at Ground Zero? And I said, I'd be more than honored to do that, Miss Winfrey. And so I went, but I didn't have a kitchen, but what I did, I borrowed a kitchen. So I baked hundreds of cookies. And I went to Ground Zero with the mayor's attaché, and I started giving out cookies. I said, I know it's just a cookie, but maybe it'll make you feel better. And I just giving cookies out and everything like that. And then after I came back, I had written back to the table, which people liked, but I was wondering, like, this was a horrible thing that happened. But the reality is the world is not a horrible place. And so I wanted to write something called World Table. How can we bring the world back to the table? How can we come together and talk? So anyway, I started writing it, and I started with these kind of very almost like lyrics, very lyrical. I said, for our world is a quilt, its people a fabric, all joined together by common threads, food, family, music, art, sports. For music is the voice of the world, for you can hear its passion and feel its pain. The idea that demonstrating the common thread of humanity and seeking out those common threads and learning to understand our differences and finding beauty in them. And so Disney was my publisher, and I took it to them. We had just done the first book. They said, we don't think the world's ready for this. And I was like, so angry. And I said, for a company based on imagination and dreams, it ain't happening. And so I took my manuscript, threw it in the desk, and I said, be gone with you.
Around that time, your husband, Jesus Salguero, an artist, encouraged you to buy a building that used to be a church. What did you say to him?
I said, no, Jesus. First of all, your name is Jesus, you paint angels, and you want me to buy a church. That just says crazy.
But you went ahead and purchased the building, didn't you?
So we bought the church. Oh, my God. And the problem is that we bought it sight unseen and had a lot of problems and stuff. And I kept saying, what are we going to do with it? Well, Chef, you're going to teach cooking, and I'm going to teach art, and through that, we're going to teach many lessons. And we kept saying, yeah, mother's love, regardless of one's cultural and diverse, whatever. Love has no boundaries, you know? So anyway, we doodled around with that. Jesus says, and during this time, he was suffering from a brain tumor. So we were dealing with that. I didn't know it was happened. So anyway, I started working on it, and the building that we've got wouldn't work because it had asbestos. So we went down to the Episcopalians. They're lovely people. And they let me camp out in their kitchen downstairs, which hadn't been cooked in a long time. A friend of mine gave me her stove that I can use, and Le Creuset, my first partner, sponsor, Le Creuset came and gave us pots and kids, and I set up little stations. I had learned all that cooking at Williams-Sonoma, how to set up little cooking stations. I taught my first class of biscuits and cornbread. It was a huge success, and we all cried and like, oh my God, it worked. And then we had no money, and then it just kind of started catching on, and I sold, and I hawked tomatoes for Del Monte, and I would take on these jobs to raise money for Common Threads. And then by a leap of faith, I met a man that came to see Oprah. She wasn't there. He came to Chicago, took care of him, and then after he said, come see me in Los Angeles, and I kind of had a feeling like he's special, but I didn't know much. And I wasn't as good at Googling as I am now. And I got there, and I had gone out there to do Oprah's 50th birthday, and that's where Fried Chicken premiered. And then from there, I said, I'm going to go see my friend Charlie. He's got a little girl, and she's not eating. They're staying in a bungalow at the peninsula. He said, all right, I can't get her to eat. I said, Charlie, let me show you something. Call room service. They brought the chicken, broccoli, and stuff. I said, Lily, come over here. I said, Lily, it's delicious. And she's eating, and he's looking at me like, what did you do? I said, it's just something my mother did. My mother would eat stuff, and I would eat it because she ate it. And so he said, I have the ability to help you with this if you want to take this to a different level. I said, well, that's great. His name was Charles Annenberg, but he went by Charles Weingarten. And Charlie, as we call him, is the grandson of Walter Annenberg, the great philanthropist that saved PBS. And he gave me $3 million to teach his kid how to eat broccoli and chicken. And that was all she wrote.
Amazing. And that's how Common Threads took off. Finally, you are involved in diplomacy. You were also in the Culinary Diplomacy Corps.
Right.
How important is that?
It's totally important. The fact is that we send diplomats, but without food, a diplomat can't do their job. I mean, when I'm not here, I'm working for the ambassador, Randy Levine.
U.S. ambassador to Portugal.
U.S. ambassador in Portugal. And Ambassador Levine calls me there to do dinner parties. People think it's a lot of lavishness. It's not about that. It's about the fact is you get a lot done with food. And I have traveled all over the world and done this. I have cooked from places like Azerbaijan. I've cooked in Milan. We did a big pop-up there for the World's Fair. I cooked in Latvia, Lithuania, China, Russia, in the Middle East, in Ramallah. I cooked in Tel Aviv. And, we opened a school in South Africa together where Oprah said they're bringing their parents. And when you invite children to bring their parents in South Africa and Africa, it means a whole lot. So party that was expected to be 5 was over 1,000. And we did it. And I love that. So, diplomacy enables us to come together. Again, like I said before, a little food goes a long ways. And I don't do no business without food, I'm telling you. But if you really want to get people on your side, if you really want people to be there for you, feed them. When all else fails, feed them. It's amazing what a little bit of food can do. And I believe and have believed that most unhappiness in the world, comes from a lack of food. And if you feed the people, those problems will go away. And thanks to wonderful people like Rotary who are helping to feed people, not only their stomachs, but their minds and create shelter and as well as education, they have been able to do and carry that wonderful universal philosophy is that we are all God's creatures and we should all be there to support each other in our efforts.
Chef Art Smith, thank you so much for talking to the Rotary Voices podcast. This episode is produced and edited by Monica Eng and Wen Huang. Yu Su Kim is the sound engineer and provided the music.